Thank you. Mr Ettershank.
Thank you, Acting President. I rise to make a contribution to the Justice Legislation Amendment Police and Other Matters Bill 2025 on behalf of Legalise Cannabis. The bill expands police and PSO stop and search powers. It further restricts the rights of protesters, and it changes the rules around the destruction by police of seized drugs and drug-related equipment. And we'll come back to that with some questions about that in Committee of the Whole. It's the government's latest regressive so-called tough-on-crime bill. This one implements an unnecessary and harmful expansion in police and PSO powers and seeks to further erode our civil liberties. The edge of the wedge, driven further into our democratic hearts with each populist stunt. Over 90 new police powers have been introduced in the last 5 years with no corresponding increase in oversight. A seemingly endless recycling of old laws that have proven to be ineffective, discriminatory and expensive, all in the name of community safety. Excuse me. But this is about a government attempting to shore up its re-election chances and a Premier who jerks reflexively at every Herald Sun headline and seems to mistake legislating for leadership. I confirm from the outset, as you may have already guessed, that we won't be supporting this bill. Our vote makes little difference, as the bill has been enthusiastically endorsed by the opposition, and it is really getting harder and harder to distinguish between our two major parties on some of these issues. It seems that, if anything, the opposition feel the government's authoritarian overreach doesn't quite extend far enough. The bill hands more power to police to stop and search people without a warrant and without suspicion in key transit points outside a designated area, at bus stops and train stations, or perhaps further on. America's justice system has many, many flaws, but the concept of probable cause and due process are enshrined to a degree that the police powers proposed in this bill would be struck down. There are practical considerations as to why this is a bad piece of legislation as well. It weakens safeguards for children and people with an intellectual impairment by removing the requirement that a parent, guardian or independent person be present for a search. Yes, Mr Limbrick, it is disgusting. Requiring only that another person be present, and of course that person can be a police officer. Random searches are also incredibly inefficient. Only 1% of random police searches yield anything. Targeted ones have a slightly better hit rate of around 17%, but it's still a lot of money for a pretty poor catch rate. There is gross potential for scope creep and misuse, particularly around police preempting criminal offences with no requirement to prove criminal intent. Now, we know these laws will disproportionately impact First Peoples in Victoria, along with all the other usual suspects. The cognitive dissonance of this government, once again, is stunning. Last month, they passed the historic treaty bill. Well done. And next week, we'll deliver an apology to our state's First People. One that will acknowledge the responsibility of predecessors for laws, policies and practices that contributed to injustices against First Peoples in Victoria. But that's apparently as far as they're prepared to go. The Police Minister himself told the Yuruk Justice Commission about the challenges of combating racism, discrimination and unconscious bias in our police force. And yet, the use of excessive and illegal force continues against people from those communities and other marginalised communities with inadequate oversight. It's very disturbing given the Centre Against Racial Profiling has found that profiling of Aboriginal, African, Middle Eastern and Pacific Island communities has in fact worsened since the practice was outlawed by Victoria Police in 2016. And let's face it, police have never been known for using increasing powers lightly. Now, protective services officers hold these same biases, these same patterns of racial profiling and targeted behaviour towards people who are homeless, people with mental health issues, and people living in poverty. The difference is that PSOs get a mere 12 weeks of training. Youth law rightly notes that PSOs are not known for de-escalating situations. Sending them into more public spaces where children and teenagers hang out, like shopping centres, will see intensifying situations that should never involve force, let alone a firearm. Youth law's clients are young people who are already over-policed, traumatised and unfairly targeted. They are disproportionately stopped, questioned and searched, too often without any lawful basis. VALS, the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, also noted that PSO's contribution to unsafe environments for vulnerable communities, Aboriginal people and those experiencing social disadvantage over the years. And we're going to let them loose into yet more public spaces, fully armed with guns, tasers and OC spray, with the power to arrest and hold people? Seriously? It is profoundly concerning. The government barely consulted with Victoria Police and not at all with the legal sector. They ignored Aboriginal community groups, entirely contrary to their newly minted treaty. I mean, how does that work? Jeremy King represents people making civil claims against police after failing to receive any remedy from our police complaint system. His firm, Robinson Gill, receives many complaints about PSOs, and he has no doubt that the increased use of PSOs will see a rise in complaints and a rise in claims. Moving on. We find ourselves again debating protest laws for the second time in a matter of weeks. I said it then and I will say it now. It is our right as citizens to protest. It is a basic right. That's the right to, and the right to protest in Australia is protected and it should be celebrated. As I mentioned just the other week, I cut my political teeth in Queensland protesting Premier Joe Bjelke-Peterson's anti-protest laws. Laws handing police powers to approve protest applications and to declare a gathering of 2 or more people without a permit to be illegal. I found myself musing over how far off Victoria might be from introducing something similar if this sort of legislation goes through. Anyway, I was one of thousands of Queenslanders who went to the protest marches, and I was duly arrested and charged a dozen or so times, beaten up by the Queensland Police a couple of times, and I have never regretted my actions because it's about liberty, it's about democracy and it's about justice. This bill proposes handing Victoria Police extraordinary powers to arrest and harass protesters where there is no danger to the public. I acknowledge some slight government amendments to soften the face covering offence, reducing it to an offence for not removing a mask when police ask you to, and some exemptions. But this is a gross violation of our rights and another example of that creeping normalisation of police being able to arbitrarily interfere in our autonomy and in our privacy. I am so sick of government and police spruikers saying, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. This whole spin is based on the false premise that people's privacy, its sole purpose, is to conceal wrongdoing. It denies the possibility that someone may just want to conceal personal, embarrassing or sensitive information, and that should not be an offence. Why shouldn't someone who has been subject to gender-based violence, stalking, doxing or other violence be able to protect themselves and their families by preserving their anonymity while protesting? Of those who wish to protect themselves from racial profiling or, God forbid, from the unlawful and indiscriminate use of OC spray and tear gas by police. Police already have powers to remove face coverings if a crime is reasonably suspected. So where's the justification for these further powers? Where is it? And then, or the lack of intelligence. And then we have the new lock-on laws. People who intentionally lock or affix themselves to something in a protest face up to a year in prison or a fine of 120 penalty units. That's over $24,000 or both? I recently walked past Trades Hall, where there now stands a beautiful, life-size bronze sculpture of Zelda Del Prano, the historic unionist and campaigner for trade union and women's rights, and I am sure an inspiration to many people in this parliament. And looking at that statue, in one hand, Zelda holds a placard with the words, "No more male and female rates, one rate only. Equal work, equal pay." In the other hand, heaven forbid, she holds a chain. And it was with a chain that she attached herself to the doors of the then Arbitration Commission to protest the glaring wage inequality for women. Now that was in 1969. Today, this Labor government, without a U, this Labor government would have locked Zelda up for a year and fined her 24 grand. Even Henry Bolte, the then Premier, would not propose such outrageous punishment. Yet this Labor government will not only do it, but it will positively brag about it. It's appalling. Those on the government benches should be ashamed. Your actions betray hundreds of years of protest by the Labor movement, by the women's movement, by the anti-war movement, and by the environmental movement, all of whom have had recourse to this method of calling out justice. And let's recognise that by its very nature, locking on is a peaceful form of protest. We are talking about cocoa violet, not cocoa violent. Protest is disruptive. Try that again. Protest is disruptive, but is also an integral part of our democracy. It may occasionally be inconvenient, and I'm sure we have all sat in our cars as a demonstration passes, and we may agree or disagree with their cause, but we must respect the right of those people to express their heartfelt concern. As the philosopher, author, Holocaust survivor, and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel said, "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." Sometimes you just got to get people's attention, and sometimes it takes a bold action to capture the public's notice. Of course, it would all be much easier if everyone just stayed at home, but where would that have got us? And let's recognise that once these powers are implemented, they are rarely or never ceded. I think for that reason, many of us are concerned about the recent announcement of a 6-month designated area being declared for the City of Melbourne. It's possible that these combined actions may reward the government with a boost in the polls, temporarily. Locking away more people in our overcrowded jails and remand centres may clear the streets a bit, and they may be able to scare enough kids away from shopping centres over the Christmas period. Who knows? The government might even be able to ride that bump all the way to the next election. But it will not make any difference to crime and violence in the long term. The shameful thing is that the government knows this. They know it because all the evidence shows that these types of policies are ineffective and they are expensive, and yet they are still going to do it. And they know there are things that do work. I understand the Premier was so taken by the remarkable work of the Scottish Violence Reduction Programme that she announced that we will be using that model to start our own violence reduction unit here in Victoria. Now, I'm not sure she entirely understands the Scottish model. See, that model is a holistic, system-wide approach to keeping young people out of jail. It's well-resourced, it's evidence-based, it requires that all sectors, schools, health, social work, homelessness services and police, work together to engage young children with those foundational supports when they're first starting to show signs of disengagement. Its success has been in breaking the cycle of youth incarceration, not in finding further ways to incarcerate young people. It's a cynical, it's a tokenistic, and it's a deplorable move by the government. I would draw the Chamber's attention to the reality that in a $2 billion budget, the police allocate less than 1% to crime prevention. And I think that says it all. And that also says that a $20 million violence reduction unit is going to make almost no difference at all. Before I finish this, another clause that Legalise Cannabis Victoria is interested in. For various reasons, the bill will authorise Victoria Police to destroy drugs and drug-related equipment subject to certain safeguards for fair trial rights. These safeguards include the ability to seek an independent analysis of samples and the retention of sufficient samples for forensic evidence for, say, the duration of any court proceedings or appeal periods. However, it is not clear how these changes would impact someone who disputes their charges on the ground of, for example, the weight of a seized cannabis plant. The initial weight may include the entire plant and root system, soil and all, and the water content of a freshly harvested plant can double the weight of the plant. The only sellable part of the cannabis plant are the dried flowers, and those can weigh less than a third of the entire plant. The difference in weight can mean the difference between a personal use quantity, a commercial quantity, or a trafficable quantity. And that's quite a dramatic upscaling of offences, just for being a good gardener and having the right soil conditions. We'll be seeking some clarity on this clause in the Committee of the Whole stage. And while we're talking about police resources, why are we continuing to waste them on policing cannabis? The 2025 Pennington Cannabis Report has once again highlighted the ridiculous sums of money we waste. They write, "Prohibition of personal use cannabis continues to absorb billions in enforcement while failing to reduce criminal use, instead funneling everyday Australians into the criminal justice system." Acting President, we all know we cannot arrest our way to a safer community. Our Chief Commissioner has said as much repeatedly. If the government is serious about community safety, it needs a different approach. It needs to fund those vital supports that help young people, youth workers, mental health supports, housing and early intervention, rather than continue to push them through the revolving door of the justice system. This is the world we have made, and young people are a part of it. They deserve support, not surveillance, and they don't deserve vilification. They certainly deserve better than to be sacrificed as fodder for the government's election campaign. We don't create community safety by placing ever more restriction on people's lives and by handing greater power to the police. It hasn't worked to date, and it won't work in the future. As Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt wrote in their work, How Democracies Die, and I quote, "The tragic paradox of the electoral route to authoritarianism is that democracy's assassins use the very institutions of democracy, gradually, subtly, and even legally, to kill it." I urge members to consider carefully what you are voting for today and to oppose this bill. Thank you.